Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back for the 155th Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. We are going to do a deep dive today on nuclear power and especially the Diablo Canyon reactors in California. Unit 1, we have just heard this past week, will not, repeat, Unit 1 will not be inspected by Pacific Gas and Electric for embrittlement, which is absolutely insane. And we will go deeper into that. We're going to be joined by Linda SEELEY from the San Luis Obispo Mothers for Peace. We're also going to go into a deeper dive as well on the new reactors. There's been major news this past week that the principal maker of the so-called small modular reactors, which are supposed to save the world for the nuclear industry, the company NuScale has essentially fabricated customers that they were using as a pretense to sell their product and raise money. And within a very short period of time, their stock dropped by 2/3. We have a great green energy experts with us, Robert FREEHLING and in California, Ron Leonard in New York, who are going to go deeper into where we stand with renewables, which continue. If there's been a miracle in our lifetimes, no matter how long your lifetime might be, at this point, it has been the astonishing progress of renewable energy, and we're going to talk about that. So this whole first hour, if you're not an energy geek, if you're bored by this, come back in another hour. We're going to deal with political issues. The new Speaker of the House, who appears to actually be a human being, his name is Mike Johnson. Stephen Colbert posited that they had just made up that name and then went and found somebody named Mike Johnson to be Speaker of the House. But that's who we're going to have. We also have some major gerrymandering issues in Georgia, North Carolina, and Alabama, and elsewhere. But the principal business today is going to be dealing with renewable energy, but more specifically and immediately, the refusal of the PG&E to test the Diablo Canyon reactor for embrittlement, which is basically saying that we don't. I'm listening to a voice moving now, sweetie. So no need to, just wanted to let you know. Mute. Hello. There we go. So I want to say we're joined by some pretty fantastic people. As always, Hetty Tripp in Minnesota, lifetime long activist, Tatanka Bricka in Central California, John Steiner in Colorado, Carl Grossman on Long Island, Myla in Santa Monica here. We are engineered, as usual, by Steve Caruso and Mike Hirsch, and we're joined by Wendy Lederman in Florida. Before we take the deep dive into the energy issues that are immediate and about which we can actually take tangible action, I am going to call on Wendy Lederman in Florida to give us a brief moment on the horrendous wars that are going on in the world right now. Wendy, can you do that, please?
Sure, thank you. Not with much joy, but thank you. Yeah, I know we did a segment last week, and we decided that this week we would just give a moment. There's a lot of reporting going on, and it's kind of a door that once we open it, it's hard to shut back. But we do want to acknowledge what's happening right now. I was asked to keep it nonpartisan, and it's a little difficult because on one side of the conflict, we've had 8,000 people, about 500 people a day, half of them are children. And these are with American weapons paid for with your tax dollars. So I would just suggest that every day people call their Congress people, their representatives, the White House, and explain that we need peace. We don't need to travel further into World War III. We don't need the bloodshed that's happening and just the way that it's happening without having food, gas, water, fuel, communications all cut to civilians. And we're all heartbroken. We're all sick to our stomachs. It's devastating and just actually unbelievable and unfathomable to grasp, but yet many of us can't get it out of our minds. And so we do want to acknowledge that. And just so everyone Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. We're praying for peace, peace in the Middle East, peace in Ukraine, peace everywhere, and peace with our planet. Thank you so much for that, Wendy. We are going to move now into a place that really needs peace, which is the nuclear power world. As we've ascertained, the nuclear reactors on this planet are all part of the nuclear weapons industry. That's why they are so thoroughly supported beyond the marketplace. I want to welcome Kathy Wolf from Maine. We're going to talk a bit about Maine. Kat Kramer is with us, the great filmmaker, actor, and convener of film festivals. Sandy Bolzinius from Columbus, and we're also joined by Maya Van Rossen of the Green Amendment Alliance. But we want to go now to Linda SEELEY. Linda is with the Mothers for Peace. She is at the cutting edge of the attempt to make California post-nuclear. Anna Georgi is just joining us from Western Mass. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. It has 2 remaining nuclear reactors, and Germany, the 4th largest economy in the world, has none. So we hope that we're hoping that California will follow in those footsteps. The reason we're convening so focused today is because Diablo Canyon Unit 1 is shut and it is embrittled. And for those of you who haven't been with us, embrittlement defines the state of the reactor pressure vessel, which essentially turns to the composition of glass in many ways after decades of intense heat, radiation, and pressure. And in an accident or an emergency situation, the braking system of a nuclear reactor is essentially to pour in water, very, very sophisticated, and to cool down a runaway reaction. The problem with embrittlement is, among other things, that if you have an embrittled reactor pressure vessel, and that pressure vessel is flooded with cold water while it's hot, it will shatter. And if it shatters, like glass, you will have massive explosions involving steam, hydrogen, and even nuclear fission. And so it behooves a country with 94 atomic reactors that have an average age of 40 to check and see if the pressure vessels are embrittled. Because essentially, if you have a pressure vessel that's embrittled, when you hit the brakes on this reactor, it will explode. And many of you who are driving cars, if you hit the brakes and exploded, I don't think that would be wise, especially if you were throwing a radioactive cloud into the winds directly in the Los Angeles County and Santa Barbara in between, not to mention the Central Valley of the Bay Area. And I will say that the 2 reactors at Diablo Canyon are perfectly sited. If you wanted to site 2 reactors that would spread a radioactive cloud across the entire continental United States, Diablo Canyon is where you would do it. So Linda SEELEY has been on the case for 50 years, and even though she's started when she was 15, and or thereabouts. And the bottom line here is that her group, Mothers for Peace, which is one of the great groups, mothersforpeace.org, has filed numerous lawsuits, illegal interventions, and utility commission interventions. And what we'd like from you, Linda, if you could possibly give us an overview of all the administrative, legal, et cetera, actions that the Mothers for Peace is taking to keep Diablo Canyon Unit 1 from reopening before it's tested, before they test the brakes. They did test the brakes in 2003 to 5 and found them deficient. That was 20 years ago. They were required by law to test again 10 years ago. They didn't do it. And now this past week, PG&E has announced they're not going to do it this year either. So, Linda, can you give us the rundown on what the Mothers for Peace is doing and how we can help?
Thanks, Harvey. Thanks for inviting me on today. And yeah, I'm Wendy. Thank you for starting it off that way too, because all of our lives, I think, are so impacted by what's happening in the Middle East. And by the way, Ukraine has fallen off the map. What we don't even know what's happening there, but that's a whole other thing.
Yes, and I will mention, since we are in the nuclear world, that Ukraine has 6 atomic reactors, Zaporizhia, which are under Russian control and in a war zone. And
Right.
So we won't belabor that. But go ahead, Linda. Now, please tell us what the mothers are doing and how we can support it.
Okay. I'm going to start off with how you can support anybody who lives in California. Please call your state assembly member and your state senator and say that we need to get Unit 1 inspected now while it's offline. They have already gotten permission. PG&E has already gotten permission not to inspect Unit 1 while it's in this shutdown for refueling right now. They wrote to the NRC, asked if they could wait till 2025 to do this, and the NRC said, sure, you can wait till 2025. Plus, it takes 18 months to get the results back from the test. So we're talking about 2027 till we have any actual results. The thing I want everybody to be aware of today is something that is irking me so badly. In the Mothers for Peace brief, and Harvey, I sent you an email with a bunch of links for our different filings, etc. I didn't know how to put it onto here.
If you can send it to S. Caruso, or I'll look it up. Steve is the one who puts them in the chat.
Okay, if you could just forward that to Steve, that would
please. Okay.
Thank you. So this Unit 1 reactor vessel back in 2003, they pulled a coupon. We've already talked about this several times on this call. They pulled a sample out of this reactor vessel. They found that by 2021 to 2023, this reactor vessel was going to reach its limit for embrittlement. Okay. So then they were supposed to test it again 10 years later. They made an agreement with the NRC that they couldn't pull it out back in 2012. They couldn't do it. They couldn't get a sample out of there. And so they said, well, the NRC said, that's okay. You can take data from other nuclear plants and substitute that data for the data at Diablo Canyon, which they did. And lo and behold, when I have a new graph that a colleague is working on, it's not ready for distribution yet. But when I saw it this morning, my head exploded. It's a graph that shows how in 2003, they took the sample out. That showed it's going to be brittle by 2021 to 23. In 2012, they took another sample out, and then suddenly, no, they did not take another. They started using the data from a different reactor. Suddenly, that curve on the embrittlement went way down. Oh, it's not really embrittled. And then they did another sample they did a mathematical computation that showed them that the embrittlement went down even more. So that according to the latest data, that plant could run for like 1 million years and never get embrittled, because the embrittlement keeps on getting less and less the longer it goes.
And let's make clear on this. The idea that you can test for embrittlement on a reactor by looking at a similar reactor is like if you're driving in California and you have to get your brakes inspected, and you're driving a Volkswagen bus and you say, well, I can't inspect this one, but that bus over there has good brakes, so mine are okay. That's the equivalent of what they're doing.
Exactly.
With a nuclear power plant.
And with a nuclear power plant that sits on 13 earthquake faults. What could possibly go wrong? Okay.
So you have filed, Linda, in federal court and
Yes.
in front of the NRC and in front of the PUC. Can you tell us specifically about each action?
Our federal court case, which is going to be heard the first week of January, is about the fact that the NRC granted the PG&E, the ability to file for a license renewal only 10 months before the old license runs out. The usual time to file is 5 years in advance of the expiration of a license. They have allowed 1 or 2 plants to file 3 years before the license ran out. This one is 10 months before the license runs out. So we've got that in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
So that's in the federal court. Mothers for Peace has filed an actual lawsuit demanding that the NRC follow its own rules on relicensing. What a concept.
Right. That's the only thing we're asking for them to follow their own rules. Okay.
I do want to mention, jump in real quick. Ray McClendon is with us from Georgia. Ray, great to see you. We're going to talk in the second hour about the gerrymandering and legal cases in Georgia. This first hour, we're going to focus on nuclear and energy issues. So hope you can join us in the second hour. If you can't, we certainly will understand. So this graphics from Steve here is Diablo Canyon was in fact scheduled to shut down in 24 and 25. There was a deal cut in 2016, and Gavin Newsom jumped in and now has said they're going to stay open. Go ahead, please. Sorry.
Okay, so we've got that federal court case. We have an appeal going out to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission about this embrittlement, the embrittled reactor vessel of Unit 1. That they denied our petition on that. We petitioned that they test the sample from Unit 1 while it's down for refueling, but they denied that petition to us. So we're appealing that petition right now. We also have a case in the California Public Utilities Commission where we have proven this is the totally ironic part of Diablo Canyon. The reason that Gavin Newsom wanted to keep it online is because he was worried about blackouts during the hottest time of the year. And the blackouts would come between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. on the hottest days of the year in California. Well, Mothers for Peace also, all of these testimonies will appear in the chat soon. We hired the former head of the Mid-Continent Independent Systems operator, which is like the big regulator. We have the Cal ISO here. They're called the ISOs. There are 4 of them in the US. As our expert, we hired the former head for 15 years of the Mid-Continent ISO, who looked at all of the numbers about available renewable resources for California, including battery storage. And he has found that we do not need Diablo Canyon. We don't need the power from it, even to stop brownouts. In fact, Diablo Canyon hurts the grid because of its unremitting 2,200 megawatt, it's called baseload power, they can't ramp up and down, unlike renewables that can come on and go offline very easily. But Diablo Canyon, you can't ramp it up and ramp it down or it'll blow up. So they have to keep it on all the time. Plus, in order to keep Diablo Canyon online, the state is required to keep 2,200 megawatts of power in reserve 24/7, not use it, but keep it in reserve in case Diablo Canyon does go online. So if Diablo Canyon were offline, we'd have that extra 2,200 megawatts to work with. So we have enough energy in our backup battery reserves to hold us through those critical 4 to 9 p.m. hot times in California, which come up maybe once a year. Didn't come up at all this year. Last year it came up once.
So Linda, now you've told us about your federal lawsuit.
Mhm.
Now, are you in front of the Public Utilities Commission as well on this issue?
That's
And
what
then-
I was just talking about.
Okay, so now you have a filing based on that. And we
Yeah.
actually have energy experts Robert FREEHLING and Ron Leonard to talk about the
Great.
renewable dimension. We have 57 people on the call. And then you also have proceedings in front of the commission itself about the relicensing. Is that right?
Yeah, but they've rejected it. They veered us over to this other part of the commission, which is the staff. We petitioned for a hearing in front of the petitioners. They rejected it. They sent us over to the staff and said we should file. This is too much in the weeds for people to know about, but it's called a 2.206 petition, which is the kind of petition that, like, if you were worried about Diablo Canyon as just a concerned citizen, you have the right to file a 2.206 petition with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And I looked up the history of 2.206 proceedings. I only got back about 6 years. Every single one of them was rejected. That's right. What they do when they want to reject something. They send it over to the 2.206. Okay.
So you have three major actions, although I will point out that in 1992, a 2.206 petition did help shut the Yankee Row reactor in Massachusetts. This is important for people who follow this. And well, everybody in California at least needs to know this. There is a precedent for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to force the shutdown of an atomic reactor that was embrittled. In 1992, the Yankee Row reactor was at the time it was 30 years old. Diablo now is 40. Was believed to be embrittled. There was a lot of reasons to suspect. And so for political reasons, there was an actual congressional hearing at which I testified. The chairman of a subcommittee, Peter Kosmeyer of Pennsylvania, demanded that the chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission get a report on embrittlement from the Yankee Row reactor. And the Yankee Atomic, which owned Yankee Row, couldn't do the test. And with a gun to their head, they never reopened. They were actually shut by lightning and never reopened. So there is precedent for a nuclear power plant being embrittled and not reopening because of embrittlement. But Linda is right. The 2.206, in Ron DeSantis's phrase, is where nuclear concerns go to die. But at any rate, so what we have going now in California with a truly great group, the Mothers for Peace, is three important proceedings: a federal lawsuit based on them following their own rules, a PUC proceeding based on the fact that Diablo is not needed, and a challenge within the commission on embrittlement. Is that correct?
That's right. And I
go ahead.
Carol Hisasaway, one of our board members, wrote in here, what people can do to help is to donate money to Mothers for Peace. I forgot about that. We have hired these expert witnesses that are very, very expensive. And we're a completely volunteer grassroots organization. We have a board of 6 active members, and we are literally working our tails off to
right. For
get
no
this
pay
done. And we need, it's not just that it's for no pay. Our experts are not for no pay. That's the problem. And we have to worry about that. And plus we have 2 lawyers that we have to pay.
So
and there's a donate button on our website. So,
but if you're in California, you need to call your state reps, your state senators, and your congresspeople, and you know they're going to say, well, we don't have the power, but they do have the power. Go ahead, Linda.
What they can do, the reason we want you to call your state reps is this legislature created SB 846. They can uncreate it. they can create a new law that says we have enough resources. We don't need Diablo Canyon. It needs to shut down in 24 and 25. And that's what we're working on now. We're meeting with state legislators every day, different ones, to tell them the actual facts about Diablo Canyon, because guess what? They don't know. They are busy doing, it's not because, and I don't, hold it against them, because they're in their own districts. They're taking care of their own constituents. The world is on fire. Things are collapsing. They just don't have the bandwidth unless it's brought to their attention. So if you call your own representative and say, look, this is a thing that can affect all of California. We don't need it, and it's dangerous. I mean, it's like this ludicrous proposition. Here we have a nuclear power plant that could melt down and kill everybody, and we don't need it. So that is like an insanity right there.
Right, and it should be illegal. Tatanka Bricker is on with us, and I want to call on Tatanka. He's done a lot of campaigning, has brought a lot of people in, and then we're going to go to Robert FREEHLING and Ron Leonard to talk about the renewable situation. I do have a hand from Ruth Strauss. We have 58 people on. Go ahead, Ruth Strauss, please, and then we'll go to Tatanka. Gotta unmute you.
Yeah, hi. Two quick things. One is, should we be writing, I may have missed it, but should we be writing the NRC ourselves like you were talking about? That's number one. Even if it goes in a circular file, just to be on record, or what would you say?
I think so. Yeah. But let them know we are not happy.
But your leverage as a Californian is stronger with the assembly. You're better likely to get a better result.
I meant both.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure, absolutely.
And the other thing I wanted to say is that I know you know this, but this business about 4 to 9, I live near Century City, and I can look out my window every night and see all these empty office buildings just ablaze. That's like one part of Los Angeles, which is one part of one city in the California. And, that whole business could be cut down and, help immeasurably with the grid.
Absolutely. We waste so much.
Tatanka, I'm going to call on you in a minute. I know that Myla jumped in real quick here, and then we'll go to Tatanka. Myla, you wanted to jump in real quick, and then we'll go to Tatanka, please.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm also hearing that Gavin Newsom may be changing his mind on this. He may be embarrassed, and we need to give him to allow him to save face. So please contact Gavin Newsom as well. And I was trying to look up his phone number. So when you're making your phone calls and you're sending those emails, send them to Gavin Newsom as well, and tell him that we have enough energy. We won't be facing blackouts. And please turn this ship around.
Right. And we got to remember that Diablo at this point, because this is a new paradigm, and we're going to discuss it in a minute, because Diablo blocks the grid with expensive energy. It costs us more than not having it at all, because we can fill the grid with cheaper renewables. It's a new thing, actually. It's only in the last couple of years that this has become true. But that's the reality. Tatanka, please go ahead. Thank you, Mama.
Yeah, it may be. I think we're going to have a time where people can brainstorm a little of this. One of the things we need to do is have actions that everything Linda's talking about gets out to ordinary people. So we have to do things that will hold and keep the media attention. The Back to the Future idea is not new at all. We need to get young people involved. We need to get universities involved. The place might be the state capitol. We might consider having sit-ins and teach-ins and just camp there until, people start organizing locally. People organize where they are in universities. People need to understand that this power plant is sitting in their backyard. They don't. And Linda says even the legislators everybody's busy. There's so many issues, and they have their own constituencies. I was at David Harris's memorial on Thursday night, and 3 friends from Southern California didn't even realize that Diablo Canyon was opening. Their attention was elsewhere. I mean, that's how far back they are. These are people that are, will support us. But even the people that understand that it's going to reopen have been sitting with this misinformation, disinformation, malinformation that nukes are green now, sure, digging up uranium and everything they do is green. And that they're safe now, just, we say they're safe. And that, to get rid of coal, we have to do this, all these lies. So, and the young people weren't around when we were around. They need to be educated, and they were subject for 10 years coming out of their social studies classes with nuclear energy paid for information. I mean, there's a reason why we need to think about things that can keep the media's attention so that the people can wake up. And I'm glad we mentioned Gavin again, because I had to, Carol and I were on vacation. I had to miss my high school reunion again. I went to the same high school he went to. And I have a meeting with the woman coordinating everything with our high school about doing something out of his high school. If you want to be taken seriously, Gavin, on the national level, you can't stab the people of California in the back and pretend you're an environmentalist when you do this. So we are leaving you a way out, we're leaving you. You can say you've seen the errors of your ways. My God, a politician that does that will show some, truth and reconciliation possibilities. Anyway, I'm thinking about the possibility of sit-ins and teach-ins in addition to anything else we do, both locally and maybe getting the ex-prime minister of Japan, if he's still alive, to come out and have something in LA, what it's like on the ground for a nuclear meltdown or a nuclear explosion.
Well, I will say this, Linda and I have both experienced the San Luis Obispo County Jail, and it's very comfortable. But maybe we need to get out of our comfort zone and go up to Sacramento. But I don't know where the idea that Gavin could be changing his mind is, but it's the way to win it really in California is to mobilize the solar industry. There's 70,000 people installing solar panels in California, and we have the goods, as you're going to hear. We would win in a free market, and this thing is not insured. You can't drive a car in California without insurance or without brakes, for that matter. But nonetheless, here we are. So
I'm going to follow up on what Mothers for Peace say they need. They need us to communicate to our representatives very much in the state of California. Well, you can take a bunch of people and go visit your person, and then you can get other people to do the same thing. And we can have people parked out there as well as on site at Diablo, as well as someplace in downtown LA, all with the same very simple message. We don't need it.
Right. And it's costing us money.
It's costing us money, and it's dangerous as hell.
And what people have to understand, and this is very important. I know, I'm sorry, dominating here, but there was a deal made, and the deal was in everybody's best interest. And Gavin Newsom signed that deal. It was signed in 2016 by Governor Jerry Brown, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, the unions, for God's sakes, the company, the local governments, the environmental groups, and the regulators of state and federal. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission signed off. This was a deal. The only people that didn't sign off were the Mothers for Peace, who demanded it be shut immediately, which is perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned. But nonetheless, this was, if ever there was a solemn across-the-board deal that should have been honored, it's the one that was cut in 2016. And this guy just waltzes in and pulls the plug on a deal he signed. And then
right before the legislature was going to go off to vacation, telling them a big lie. Now, I happen to believe that they weren't in good faith all along watching this. And the way I think about it, because they can't say it out loud, nuclear plants are looking at red ink now. If they have to decommission, they're just looking at losses. So what do? They do this kind of sabotage with big money coming down through the Biden administration, et cetera. Basically, the message is we're incompetent, we're broke, we're too big to fail, and the people will pay for us simply to keep going, to have the situation be even worse for the next generation. It's a
Right.
too big to fail ploy, which we've seen before, but that doesn't even get uttered. But I think that's what's happening.
Yes, and what people don't understand in California, and Mary Douglas has correctly pointed out, this is a national issue because, among other things, because of where the plant is situated. God forbid there's a major accident at Diablo Canyon, that radiation goes straight across the country. I mean, that's where it's like, focused. But what people don't understand, I don't think, in California is that the Bill 846 that they ran through the legislature makes everybody in the whole state pay for Diablo Canyon. It's no longer just limited to PG&E's service territory. And Carl Grossman knows this very well in New York. When they bailed out the 4 reactors in New York, Cuomo made the whole state pay for it. And Carl's sitting on Long Island, hundreds of miles from these 4 reactors in the upstate. He never gets an electron from them, and he has to pay for it. I'm in the DWP down here in LA. I'm paying for Diablo Canyon, which I get nothing from.
We have to pivot from some assumptions that we had, which is when solar, which is much safer and is decentralized, it's more supportive of community. When that gets competitive and gets cheaper than the alternative, we'll get it. Well, guess what? That was happening. So California leads the nation in solar. That was happening. In order to prevent the market from working, we do a backdoor, too big to fail. And the public pays, and they lie that it's safe. And, they don't even want to face embrittlement, obviously. They're running from that. So we just have to, we need people to understand this. And we need to understand that it's in their backyard, even though they think they can keep it out of sight, out of mind.
In the history of the anti-nuke movement, I'll get to Justin and Maya in a minute, and Linda, we've had this conversation. In the history of the anti-nuclear movement, when we've won, it's almost always been on economic issues.
Mhm.
And San Onofre won because the thing, I mean, what they did in San Onofre, it's like if you have a flat tire and you put the wrong size tire back on the car. I mean, these people are just so stupid. And then they had an actual radiation leak, and they were losing money. Because they were looking at a huge expenditure at San Onofre to put in new steam generators. They were supposed to put in new cooling towers at Diablo Canyon. They don't want to do that. But here we are. But I think it's the economic issues that could win it for us. And we could conceivably, we could win at the PUC. It's not likely, but we could, right? I mean, Linda, is that still a technical possibility?
Yes, it is actually technically we could win at the PUC. But, by the way, Mothers for Peace, we are meeting with the commissioners too, to talk with them and explain to them the reality of this situation rather than this fantasy that we've been given.
Yes. Well, historically, we found politically that people care less about the possibility of being wiped out by a radiation cloud than they do about their electric bill. I mean, it's the political reality. So there you go. Justin and then Maya, please. And let's keep it to where we can really do stuff here. This is very good. I really appreciate this. Thank you to talk about. And anybody else wants to jump in on this brainstorm, that's what it's for. We have 63 people with us. Go ahead, Justin, and then Maya, and then Wendy.
Yeah. So some specifics that have clear relevance. One of them is San Onofre shutdown. We mentioned about the economic case for the long-term costs versus the short-term shutdown. A big deal about that, from my understanding, is that even with realizing that it wasn't going to be profitable, SoCal Edison still had to be in some ways bought off to go through the process of the decommissioning. Now, and a lot of ratepayers are still paying for it. That said, it still would be, I think, a lot less than what the expected price tag of Diablo Canyon's extension is. They want to say that it'll be about $3.3 billion to operate it unto 2030. And so that's a lot of money that, $1 billion is 1,000 people's salary for a year on median wage. And that's 3 of those. So that's a lot of money. And secondarily, in terms of like saving face for Newsom, he could actually offload the responsibility, the burden onto the Coastal Commission, because they recently reauthorized, I believe it's something like 3,700 megawatts of natural gas plants that were scheduled to shut down, and they could reauthorize all of those too. And of course, Diablo Canyon is only 2,300, so almost double. There's plenty of margin just in that alone, much less any of the other demand response that we could.
You're right. You're right. And what we'll hear, Justin, is they don't need it. They don't need to do that even. I mean, we've got all we need from wind and solar and batteries.
Even those are excess. A total of 35% margin, and in the peak summer, Diablo is less than 5%.
Right, and just for the record, we have 1.8 million rooftop installations in the state of California, which generate as a whole way more electricity than Diablo does. At
7 times,
a fraction of the cost. So we have Ron Leonard and Bob FREEHLING on who are going to talk about that. Let's go to Maya, Wendy, and then we'll go to Bob FREEHLING and Ron Leonard. Go ahead, Maya.
So thank you for the powerful conversation, and Linda for the great leadership. Really, really wonderful. I have a question for you. The California was identified as one of the 7 hydrogen hubs. And the California hydrogen hub, like the hydrogen hub I'm on the East Coast working on the Delaware River. And the hydrogen hub that's targeted for the Delaware River, like the California hydrogen hub, is being billed as a hydrogen hub that's going to be all it's going to be green hydrogen, right? So it's going to be all clean energy is going to power the creation of the clean hydrogen, right? But very clearly in our hub, they are very clearly stating that they view nuclear as part of the clean energy that will fuel the hydrogen hub they're proposing here. And we also have plants that I've been battling for years, that should be shutting down within the coming years. And what's very clear is they're articulating, or they're naming the companies that own those plants. So it's very clear they're planning life extensions for those operations because of this hydrogen hub. And so I was just wondering, I know it's horrifying, right? But I was just wondering, Linda, if that's come onto your radar at all, this new hydrogen hub proposal.
It has, and I haven't spent that much time with it, but there's a consortium that's built here. It includes this, I wish I could remember the acronym, but it's these
It's SCREWU.
What?
It's SCREWU.
No kidding. It's between, Vandenberg Air Force Base is here. Now it's called the Space Force Base. And there's this relationship between Vandenberg and using the Diablo Canyon site as the place for this renewable energy hub, which may be the hydrogen hub. And maybe secretly deep inside, they're planning on using the green renewable energy from Diablo Canyon to power that makes my heart just.
Yeah, I'm sorry to raise it up, but I mean, we're finding, for a lot of reasons, nukes and other things, but there are a whole lot of battles we've been having for years where they were at various stages, and the opposition just got new life because they're now getting tons of money from the Biden administration to lift up all this crap. under the guise of making clean hydrogen, which in and of itself is a misnomer.
It's,
Right.
well,
Maya,
I'll
I'm
tell
sorry
you,
to raise it and put it
Maya,
on your
don't-
radar, but it's an important one, I think.
Maya, don't apologize, because the other thing unsaid, which connects the dots, is the only reason for the existence of nuclear power is fission material for nuclear weapons. And they need it. They need it to go in space. They need it for the land. And they're not talking about that. And if you listen to,
Right.
to Oliver Stone's film, Nuclear Now, which is a bust, but and RV wrote a great article on it. The very first thing they said is, one of the problems is people are misinformed. When we say nuclear power, they think nuclear weapons.
right. But
That's
the point is that
precisely the point. And that's the
Yeah.
point that nobody talks about anymore, because that's by design. That's they don't want us to connect the dots. It's all about not just that it's for nuclear weapons, but that plant 15 miles from my home and even closer to Linda's home is a nuclear weapon waiting to happen.
right, and all there's never been such a thing as the peaceful atom. It's always come out of the Atomic Energy Commission. It's fissionable material, it's trained personnel, and it's infrastructure, including waste management, that they need the civilian industry for. And Maya, all the reactors, I assume you're dealing with Limerick and Peach Bottom, and the ones in Delaware. All the reactors in this country average 40 years of age, and embrittlement is a huge issue. And it's not that hard to understand. And not all of these reactors are embrittled, all of them, because of the heat, pressure, and radiation over the decades. So you need to look at the filings that the mothers are doing on the embrittlement issue, because they definitely apply to your old reactors in your neighborhood there. And you can go back and get some great quotes from Joe Biden, who lived across the river from a nuclear plant in New Jersey. And
He lives
said,
across the river from the Salem Nuclear Generating Station, and he has
It-
not done ever when he
Right.
was in office, and he could have.
but he also
Oh,
had
dude.
some great quotes about it and about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Yeah.
You got to go back and see what he said. It was actually quite amazing. Let me do Connie Klein, and then we'll go to Wendy. Okay, Connie's in Ohio dealing with the Perry reactor. She's 35 miles from the only reactor in the United States that's been hit twice by earthquakes in Ohio. Thank you very much. Connie, go ahead, please, and then Wendy. And then
Actually,
we're going to go
I
into
live-
the renewables.
I live closer than 35 miles. I just, Linda, I put my email and phone number in the chat again. Will you put
I
yours?
did it. I did.
Oh, good. Okay. I want to get some clarification, because we're in a similar renewal battle for Perry. The lawsuit that you filed regarding the fact that they got an exemption for the 5-year rule to apply for renewal, was that also denied?
Yes, and but I forgot to say this, that will probably end up in the Ninth Circuit Court too.
Okay.
Yeah, we filed our reply brief to that last week.
And
So-
Diane Curran is doing
Correct.
it.
Yes.
And then the one about embrittlement that was denied, that's the one where they told you to file a 2.206 petition?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there no way to go to federal court on embrittlement at this point? All right, we don't know.
I don't know. Maybe. I'd have to ask Diane.
Okay. And
I
Diane
mean-
Kern, by the way, was the lawyer on the Yankee Road case in the 1990s where we won. So
Yeah,
that's a good
I
track
mean,
record.
of everything, embrittlement, you would think, I mean, it is the most serious, and you would think that someone would take it the most seriously, but
But, you know,
and as far as
funny,
hydrogen, oh, go ahead.
what I think about embrittlement is this. I think that the human being's greatest, like most adaptable and strongest response is denial. And that's for everything. It's not just about nuclear power. And they go like, well, look, it's practically 40 years old, hasn't melted down yet, you know. We're not going to.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I really think that otherwise people would be terrified.
Yes,
Well-
it's truly astounding. And go ahead, Connie.
Well, it's such an uphill battle because, when I first got involved in this, and I also go back 50 years to Davis Bessie, we had some support from the Democratic Party. There's zero now. They're the worst. And as far as hydrogen goes in Ohio, they were going to use, they were proposing a hydrogen hub at Davis Bessie. That apparently is gone now. They're not interested in that anymore. Vina Colley's on the phone. I think they're still proposing one for Portsmouth, and they're proposing one not too far from Perry, actually, in Ashtabula County, which is a county over to the east. I have not followed hydrogen that much. I mean, it's in California, you can split water using solar power and
Right.
hydrogen that way.
I will say in 2005, 6, 7, something like that, I was asked by a foundation in San Francisco to write a book about the hydrogen economy. And I took the money, had a great dinner with my buddies, and I sat down for a month to start to write about the emerging hydrogen economy. I had to go back to the guys and say, look, man, it's BS. Hydrogen is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I won't go into the detail. And that's why I wrote Solartopia, because I took the money, but I had to write a book. So I wrote Solartopia instead. But, the hydrogen economy, it's nonsense. It's a scam. It's a total scam. We can talk about it in detail another time, because I do want to get into renewables, and we are going to blow by our top of the hour, by the way. It's already 8 minutes till, and we need to do a deep dive on renewables in conjunction with Diablo, because I think that's the key to how we're going to win, not only here, but also around the rest of the country. Wendy, go ahead. Anybody else want to raise their hand? I'm going to go to Robert FREEHLING next, and we're going to jump into the renewable situation. Go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. I had a couple of quick points about Florida. I do want to say I'm glad that Maya and Linda got to meet, and I'll shoot you guys an introduction email after the show I met to last week. She's a brilliant environmental lawyer that started the green amendments movement. So I feel like you guys could have a lot of synergy. So in Turkey Point, which is like 20-30 miles from me in Miami, it's right in Hurricane Alley, sitting on Biscayne Bay. A couple years ago, they found out it's leaking tritium into Biscayne Bay and into the aquifer that serves millions of people, and they barely talk about it since. It's supposed to shut down in 2032, and there's been cases and appeals, and so FPL still trying to get them to stay open till 2050. And I just read, like just now, I'll put some links in the chat, that apparently, I guess like the plants still have like 60 years after they shut down to find something to do with the waste, which is just, I mean, like, I don't even have words for that. The water keepers, they were fighting at the Miami water keepers, but they're also saying that they're not really against nuclear. I just found a couple articles that I'll drop. The former NRC head under Obama has been really fighting for Turkey.
Greg Yasko.
Yeah, and then there's another guy who was the former mayor of South Miami, which is where Turkey Point is, and he's also a marine biologist, Philip Stoddard. He's been doing a lot of good work apparently, and when I went to go check out his website from several different links, it's all a bad gateway, so he might be an effective person if they're trying to silence him. So I'll put a couple of links in the chat, because I feel like I think it was like Minnesota, I believe, had a leaky reactor. Like this, because again, yeah. So I mean, it's something that it's like if that bursts, I'll probably feel radiation. There was radiation in California from Fukushima. Like it's all connected, and so maybe there needs to be a synergy of all the different groups getting together, just as like one united force of like, we don't need this anymore, and we all have problems, and it's like tritium in the drinking water. Come on, like, I mean, it's just unbelievable. So I just wanted to put that up. Thank you.
I will point out very briefly, in 1991, after Hurricane Andrew went directly over Turkey Point, there was a challenge to FEMA to not reopen. We came down with a group of, it's one of the few nuclear plants I've been in, because they had a press conference in there, and we demanded they not reopen until they show how they could evacuate South Florida in the middle of a hurricane. And you know, and we're carrying on this campaign, and all of a sudden they open the thing. And you know, it's insane. So you should be aware of that issue, of course, in South Florida. Can we move on to Carol Hasasway? It's good to see you. I don't know if Ray McClendon is still on. I can't see my screen for some reason. Ray, if you want to jump in and talk a bit about what's going on in Georgia with the legal situation, and of course,
Ray's
Georgia.
not here. Not
Oh,
here.
okay, he left. Georgia, God help them. They're about to get a $40 billion bill for 2 reactors. It's insane. But let's go now. As we near the top of the hour, let's switch into the realities of renewables, because that's really the key, Linda, I think, and everybody else, to winning in California and elsewhere, because wind and solar have gotten so big everywhere, but especially in California. They don't have a leg to stand on economically. Quite the opposite. So Robert Freehling and then and Ron Leonard, if you guys want to. Oh, Mary Stonewall, you said you have to leave. Do you want to say something very quick on renewables, and then we'll go right to Robert? Go ahead, Mary. Very quickly.
Yeah, quickly. Number one, I really think we should petition to get radioactivity no longer called nuclear, because that was a coin that they come up with, so it sounded like it was clean and better than coal or whatever. So we got to get rid of that because it's a misnomer. And number two, I've mentioned before, there's a Georgia case that happened in 1793. If we could overturn that one case, the citizens, can have more power when you go after these nuclear power plants because of them contaminating your land and water, because it's an infringement on your inherent natural rights as a U.S. citizen.
Okay.
And that infringement got taken away from you with the court case of 1793 in Georgia.
Yeah, I remember it, but I don't remember the name. If you put literally, I do remember the case. I just don't remember the name. If you put it in the chat, that would be great.
All right, I got to go because I'm in college now.
Oh,
at
good
58.
for you. All right. Well, but anyway, go ahead. Thank you very much. Robert, I'm going to get to you in a second. I'll give Alex a minute. Alex, go ahead very quickly, please. We didn't unmute. There you go. Go ahead, Alex.
I really liked what you talked about before.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we're glad to have you on the call. Keep with us. Okay, now Robert Freehling and Ron Leonard are 2 of the truly great experts on renewable energy. They don't get any better than these 2 guys. And Robert has done, somewhere in California, has done tremendous research specifically on Diablo, and can explain to us, and Ron will follow up on what our economic case is and why we should be able to win on this issue. So go ahead, Robert Freehling, please.
Absolutely. Thank you for having this discussion ongoing. So I've been involved with Women's Energy Matters as a party at the Public Utilities Commission in the Diablo Canyon proceeding. We were involved and worked with Mothers for Peace, actually, in both proceedings. The original one to shut it down back in 2016, and then unfortunately having to come back and relitigate this issue. As someone pointed out, this had already been a settled matter. Maybe it was Linda who talked about that. We already went through this, and PG&E actually made the case themselves that the growth of clean energy in California was going to render Diablo Canyon irrelevant in the future. Not only irrelevant, they argued that it would be an unnecessary expense, that it was not needed for reliability. They made all those arguments themselves in their written testimony. And I was there in the room when the witness from PG&E raised their hand and swore that all this testimony they were submitting to the commission was complete, true, and correct. It was on PG&E's word, if you want to trust that. But in this case, it was true. And they made multiple arguments for why Diablo Canyon would not fit in a clean energy environment, which was being mandated by state law and was growing quite rapidly. And one of these was the conflict between solar and wind energy, demand as a second element, and the fact, as Linda pointed out before, that Diablo Canyon provides inflexible baseload. And it's inflexible on a short-term basis, meaning from minute to minute and hour to hour. And it's during those periods of time that renewable energy varies, but it turns out that's also the period of time over which demand varies, because demand is not flat like a baseload plant. So solar and wind don't really introduce a new fact into this. Demand already changes, and nuclear is already unsuitable to meet that need and always needed auxiliary sources of fossil fuel and other types of energy in order to balance supply and demand, because nuclear power cannot do that by itself. So that was one thing. PG&E actually produced a graph, which we put in our testimony. I don't know if can I do a screen share?
Yeah, Steve handles that. Go ahead.
So how do I?
Yeah, hit the green button, get your screen ready to go, and hit your green button and select that screen in the share, and then click share on the right side.
Let's see if I can do this. Because I'd like to share some of the things that.
Well, of course, screen share does. Oh, there you go. Okay, but you
got
got to
it?
remember we're also on radio, so you got to be as
Verbal.
explicit.
Yeah, I'll
as
try
possible.
and verbalize the the imagery. So the first image I have here, which is in our testimony, is the history of greenhouse gas emissions in California since 2000. And during the 2000s, the first decade of this century, greenhouse emissions in the electricity sector in California peaked at about 120 million metric tons per year. That was about a quarter of the greenhouse gas emissions of the state, which made decarbonizing electricity a very high priority at that time. And those of us working in the electricity sector policy understood this was low-hanging fruit, because we only needed to put together a handful of policies together, because there's a limited number of power plants, and they are generally regulated and controlled by the government. Yes, there are elements of market there, but energy, every form of energy in this world is highly regulated and controlled by government. So government is a decision-making point. During that first decade, the state set up a series of policies, including its first climate plan, which was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. Well, it turned out that the electricity sector did far better than that and cut greenhouse gas emissions in half in a decade period. During that decade, and what this graph shows is the declining emissions from 120 million metric tons in 2008 to 59 million tons by 2020, a reduction again by half. In 2012, San Onofre nuclear plant retired, and because of all the problems they were having down there, which you mentioned before. And greenhouse emissions briefly went up for about 1 year, and by the next year, they had already declined almost to the level they had been the year before. And that's because, first of all, the things that were happening in 2012 were not just the retirement of the nuclear plant. We also had a drought, which caused increase in use of natural gas temporarily. There was also a spike in demand. If those things had not happened, the retirement of San Onofre would not have resulted in any increase in greenhouse gases that year because of the rate of the growth of clean energy. So what this graph shows is we can meet our climate targets spectacularly, even retiring a nuclear plant virtually the same size as Diablo Canyon, because of the rate we've been growing clean energy. Now, clean energy is not just renewable energy, it's also energy efficiency and conservation, which California has also been doing quite well. And that's actually almost as significant as the renewable energy. It's not just a secondary thing. A second point is that the growth of renewable energy, California currently has about 30,000 megawatts of solar energy. About half of that.
30,000 megawatts. How many megawatts is Diablo Canyon?
Diablo Canyon, great question, is a little over 2,000 megawatts.
So 2,000 megawatts versus 30.
Over 30,000, yeah. And about half of that is on rooftops, and about half of that is large scale in solar farms, which is of course something that's rather unique to solar energy, is that you can put it on rooftops. The interesting thing is that in the past year, that was true not only in California, but actually all over the world, that solar energy is about equally split. China came to realize, was the leading installers of solar energy in the world by far, way beyond what we're installing. Installed half of its solar on rooftops this past year because they found they couldn't build transmission and site large scale solar plants fast enough in order to connect it all and integrate it with the grid.
And there's one other development in solar that people may not be aware of, which is agrivoltaics, which is where they're learning very quickly how to raise crops underneath solar panels. And generally they like them to be tall, but there seems to be there was a big piece in the LA Times about this, Sammy Roth did, about how you can graze cattle, but also raise quite substantial range of shade crops under solar panels. So this idea that when you put solar panels on farmland, that it becomes a desert underneath is actually quite untrue. And they've seen that especially in California at Rancho Seco, the nuclear plant, which was surrounded by solar panels, and where they're doing quite well with agrivoltaics. So I wanted to inject that. Go ahead, Robert, please.
Yeah, well, I think you raise, in a sense, a sort of broader, more important point, which is that solar energy is the ultimately flexible type of energy for siting it virtually anywhere. I have solar cells on my pocket calculator. There's no reason that solar has to be put hundreds or thousands of miles away from where you live. The sun shines everywhere on Earth. And that benefit, that it is modular, that a single cell can generate electricity that fits on your fingernail or on the palm of your hand. It could be at that scale, or it can be enormous. But we're not fully taking advantage of that. This is a problem with the Newsom administration policy, is that they've been attacking rooftop solar at the same time that they've been promoting the nuclear power. So you asked me before, what is the conflict? Part of it is political. Another part of it is financial, which has been brought up. In this proceeding, PG&E was asked to estimate the costs of continuing to run Diablo Canyon past 2024-25, and they put down a filing that they had given to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which turned out to be an incomplete accounting, even by PG&E's admission, of the total cost. They estimated it to be about $750 million a year, which Justin was saying would add up to about $3 billion of pension. Turn, ratepayer advocate group, countered with that there were $800 million a year in costs that were not being accounted for in PG&E's filings to the CPUC or the NRC. PG&E objected to this and said, no, it's not 800 million that we left out. It was only 400 million.
Okay.
So they were haggling over how many hundreds of millions of dollars PG&E left out of their own accounting. The 400 million tops the magic number annual. If you add the 750 and the 400, means that the annual expense does top the big D, meaning it's over $1 billion a year. By PG&E's admission, and if Turn is right, it would be 1.6 billion. Now, all of that pales, of course, next to what an event like Fukushima would cost. The lowest cost for long-term for Fukushima that I saw was 170 billion, and the highest cost was over $500 billion. So there's a bottomless pit of risk for how much Diablo Canyon could cost. If that happened in California and the wind was blowing to LA, it would be
it's incalculable. It's essentially
it would be incalculable. So the financial.
Let me ask you quickly, Robert. Let me interject here. The deal that Newsom has cut to keep Diablo going involves $1.4 billion in state money and $1.1 billion in federal money. In other words, $2.5 billion. How much solar capacity could be installed in California, and how quickly for $2.5 billion?
Well, first of all, you don't need to subsidize solar energy. In other words, it's being built by customers already. As you saw, we already have 15,000 megawatts of rooftop solar without really hardly any state subsidies at all. So in a certain sense, it's free from the public purse. You don't need to spend public money on that. But to answer your question, gigawatt, you could build gigawatts with that.
And what is that? How does that compare to Diablo's capacity?
Well, as I say, you don't need to subsidize solar energy because it's actually new utility scale, large scale solar plants. The contracts have been coming in the last few years at 2 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour. That's a fraction of the 7 to 8 cents that PG&E per kilowatt hour that PG&E has on the record, and that is not even still an exhaustive accounting of all the costs. So the fact is, you can build solar energy today at large scale and save an enormous amount of money compared to continuing Diablo Canyon. And as was pointed out, a part of this nasty SB 846 was to make all customers in California of the large investor-owned utilities, which is 80% of the customers in California, financially liable to pay all the ongoing expenses going forward for Diablo Canyon after 2025. So what that means is that's like a tax on top of the renewable energy that we'll be building. You're paying for all the renewable energy, and then you'll pay a special tax on your bill for Diablo Canyon, even if you're not using 1 kilowatt hour from Diablo Canyon. That's actually been going on for years. The community choice programs are not customers of PG&E. Most of them do not take Diablo Canyon power. And any customer of a PG&E, whether they take nuclear power or not, has to pay part of their electric bill in PG&E's territory today for Diablo, their quote unquote fair share of Diablo Canyon, meaning they're using none of it, yet they have to pay for as if they were consuming a pro rata share. Now that deal is going to get expanded to the whole state after 2025.
And this was, as Carl Grossman, who's sitting on Long Island paying for the upstate New York reactors, knows and wrote about. They pulled that off in New York a couple of years ago when they subsidized $7.6 billion to keep 4 reactors going upstate, and then are forcing everybody in the state to pay for them.
And that's right? Yeah, because it's not competitive. And the reason the charge is made here is because of the above market stranded costs of Diablo Canyon. That's the part that they charge customers who have left. So the idea that Diablo Canyon's saving money, which is what the green nuclear people said, that it was going to save us money to extend it. Historically and in the future, that's not true. It's costing extra money, which is precisely what they're charging other customers, is for the above market stranded costs. That's what people pay for.
It's unbelievable. Let's let Ron Leonard jump in, another great expert on renewables. But this is all stuff, this is where we can win. This is the winning issue in California, I think. And I know that the mothers are in front of the PUC. I believe A4NR, Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility, with John Giesman, who used to be with the PUC. This is a great way to go, I think. Go ahead, Ron Leonard, please.
So there's a lot of pieces in this pie, and the pie adds up to what are we going to do? And their argument on the other side of the equation is this, oh, geez, this renewable stuff, we've never done this before. So we have to do what we used to do with the nuclear power plants and polluting turbines and other things. It's just too hard to think about it, but that's not true anymore. So first truth, solar saved the grid. Solar saved the grid in California in the exact heat wave that was described in our call. And the way it saved the grid was partially California's fault, because California had an adequate number of batteries on the grid to basically handle the excess load that occurred at 7:30 at night. But what did they do? They turned those batteries down. In other words, they drained them at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Why? Well, the law says that you have to drain the batteries when the price for electricity reaches $1. Stupid move number one. Stupid move number two was that they really didn't consider the simple fact that any grid study in the world, any right-minded ISO in the world, the California ISO to be specific, knows when these loads occur and how to deal with it. Now, if you look at a concrete example, and it's in the chat, Australia, really is a canary in the coal mine, which is what I put in the chat. And the canary in the coal mine, Australia, basically gets 32% of its energy from solar. Rooftop solar is the major part of that, a whopping 57% of the installed capacity. Now, the funny thing is, whereas California has this, 1.5, 1.8 million solar roofs, Australia has 3 million solar roofs. Whoa. And they give a majority of that power that Australia needs every day. And it works. It works very effectively. It's cheaper. The prices in Australia for power that used to be from coal are falling. It all works. We don't have to rethink the world. We don't have to reinvent things. We have proven this. And we've not only proven it in Australia, we've proven it in Hawaii, because their other argument is, oh, we can't have this distributed solar, which reinforces the effectiveness of the grid's delivery of power. Solar in where the power is needed, we can't do that because the local grid can't handle that. Well, the local grid in Hawaii is now transmitting sometimes 110% of their rated capacity for that line in the local grid with solar energy. It works. It's functional. It's cheaper. It's sensible. It's a smart thing to do. And the last part is the little action that California did last year called NEM 3. And it's the mouse that took down the world recently, sadly. And that little action, which before California decided that they were going to cut back the rebate, which is what NEM 3 is about, net energy metering, which is what NEM stands for, worked great. They were willing to put more solar in it on a yearly basis to increase the 1.8 million solar systems 40% per year on people's roofs. And the state wasn't paying for it. People were paying for it. Well, they cut that back to the extent that this year, that 40% growth is no longer a growth at all. And in fact, the California NEM 3 cutback has really actually put a damper on the solar market for this year for residential roofs. And this is the unfortunate and divisive way that government has ruled presently and in the past. And now Arizona recently, within the last month, has followed California's example of trying to kill solar rooftops, which saved the California grid. And it's just dumb. We know better than this.
Somebody's making money on it. I mean, there is certainly a major industry that doesn't want solar to spread. And that's why whenever I see all these articles about how we have to improve the grid, we don't have to improve the grid. We have to put solar panels on rooftops.
And they complain about the grid. They complained that the grid killed people in California, so they made them bury the lines in California. But that was going to cost way too much money to bury those lines. It was going to cost over $5 million a mile. Well, it only cost $4 million a mile. And I'm looking at the grid cost upgrades across the nation. And just for standard overhead lines, the utilities are scoffing up to the tune of $6 million a mile to put an overhead line in. Somebody's making a profit. And when a utility does that infrastructure charge, they are guaranteed a 10% profit.
It seems that the King Kong, coal, oil, nukes, and gas, is most afraid of rooftop solar. It's like watered for the wicked witch of the West here. That is the bottom line of democratizing the grid. But how many thousand square miles of rooftop do we have in the United States that could be covered with solar panels?
Well, actually, it's de minimis. And functionally, if we had rooftops, say the study that was done 30 years ago by my friend Richard Perez, he analyzed the rooftops in Queens and also in Staten Island and the Bronx, and figured out those rooftops could replace the entire electrical system of Con Ed, one of the largest utilities in the United States. And he looked at the amount of solar space needed for the entire power system of New York State, which is 30 gigawatts, would be 0.15% of the state's area. We have more rooftops, more parking lots, more bad land, which would be things like landfills and I don't know,
And also
canals in California.
the aqueduct. The aqueduct is 400
Exactly,
miles.
exactly.
So there you go.
We have
Well,
no problem. We have no problem. We can do this.
Linda, this is, I think, politically, this is where we can win. It seems to me, because you don't have trouble selling solar to people in California anymore. People know it works, and they know there's money in it. What we need to do, I think, above all, is to organize the solar industry. I don't know why they're not politically active. We've had this for 40 years. The solar industry apparently is politically brain dead. We've never got any mileage in shutting any nuclear power plant from the solar industry. I don't get it. I interviewed in 1976, I interviewed the head of the sheet metal workers union. His name was Ed Carlo. And they were all excited about solar because they did air conditioning. But then he got indicted on something and it never, what can I tell you? But this is how I think politically, this is where we win.
Well, I think we also need to look at the laws that favor our argument. And obviously the federal laws are in our favor now. But Linda, I think you really should look at the externality in California, which happens to do the state environmental permit for Diablo turning back on requires them to analyze the hot water going back into the bay again. And we won that case in New York against a speedies permit, polluting them, ignoring the fact that they had to apply for that permit, and took it to court, sued New York City in 2001. So you could stop nuclear power on the state law that requires them to follow procedures and file permits, because the federal law obviously is lacking in sanity. And if you look at reservoir.org, you'll see the result of suing Mayor Giuliani for trying to kill a major trout stream.
For some reason, my screen is a little screwed up. I can't get a gallery to see whose hands are up. Myla has told me that
Robert Freehling.
Robert Freehling has a hand. Steve Caruso.
Yeah, get Robert on.
Dorothy Wright, Robert Freehling, Paul Newman.
Yeah, I can't see the.
At any rate, let's hear from Robert Freehling. He's been waiting to
And then Steve Caruso, and then Paul Newman. Go
Dorothy,
ahead.
She's still there.
Oh, okay. I can't see for some reason.
Okay. So should I start?
Where are you,
now?
Robert?
Okay.
Go ahead,
thanks.
Robert. Yes.
Great.
There we go. There we go. I got it now.
You got it now. Okay, good.
Go
All
ahead,
right, so-
Robert, and then Dorothy, and then Paul.
Okay.
And then Myla. But go ahead, Robert, please.
Yeah, so I wanted to reply to a couple of things that Ron said. The California grid operator, which is called CAISO, every summer does modeling for how much different resources might be needed for the summer and whether there'll be any shortfall. And he mentioned how last September, when we had record peak demand of 52,000 megawatts on the CAISO grid, thousands of megawatts higher, about 2,000 megawatts higher than it had ever been. Remind people that the power did not go out anywhere during that record heat. We had plenty of reserve margin. The North American Electric Reliability Council put out a report that said California's grid had grown to a 35% reserve margin above forecast peak demand. So we have plenty of electricity. A lot of that is the solar energy. And their modeling, they ran 2,000 scenarios through their grid modeling, and found that the reserve margin would drop below 6% in the hours that you mentioned, that had been mentioned before, between 4 and 8 or 9 p.m. There were no shortages of reserve margin outside of those hours. And so what that showed is that batteries and demand response are the perfect answers, and not a base load plant that runs around the clock. I looked at one of the studies that the state had done, the CPUC, on demand response. And they found that you could reserve 2,000 megawatts of demand response on call, round the clock, all year long, for about a tenth of the cost of the over $1 billion a year that Diablo Canyon costs us. And we were successful in getting a provision in SB 846 last year to require the state to adopt a demand response target, which the Energy Commission did at the end of May, set a mandate of 7,000 megawatts of demand response by 2030. They said we already have 3,000, so that would add another 4,000. So that's 2 Diablo Canyons worth of reliable capacity. And we have built almost certainly at this point over 6,000 megawatts of batteries, almost none of which existed in 2000. They only had about 200 megawatts available when the outages happened in August 2020. And there was no excuse for that. They had a law in place already a decade ago for mandating battery storage for 2020. And a study was done by a major consulting firm that showed California should have 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts of batteries together with its 33% renewable energy standard in 2020. And the CPUC and the CAISO and everybody else stumbled and delayed it. Now, since then, they did rapidly catch up in the subsequent years, and now we have far more than that on the grid, and thousands of more megawatts are being added every year. So there shouldn't be any reason to be having concerns about power outages going forward. I think the governor is covered on that issue. Now, there are other causes of outages, like power lines going bad. That's actually 70% or more of power quality issues are due to the wires, which are a mess in California and need to be fixed. And adding more power supplies is not going to fix that. So we do need to address the wire because we've neglected it.
Well, you know, to me, this is hopefully where I think my screen just went wacky again. Well, let's go Steve Caruso, then Dorothy. Go ahead, Steve, and then Dorothy.
Yeah, the whole thing with privatization of everything. You look at Ma Bell, one example, kind of disappeared when cell phones showed up. Now we have all these cables buried underground. So the same thing with solar. I mean, there's no reason to be giving all this wealth and money to privatize the industry. It doesn't need to be done, and it should be in the hands of the people, which is essentially nationalizing the system, which scares the bejesus out of the right wing. So that's my point.
Yeah, a good one. Dorothy, please, Dorothy Wright.
It's just amusing that I just got an email from the woman who sends emails about Saddle Peak around, and they're going to underground our power poles up on Saddle Peak. God knows what that's going to cost, but
well, it's actually much cheaper.
Yeah, because it's it's a big fire hazard up on Saddle Peak, so they're doing it there. But also, we're all going to get our views improved and everything.
Yeah, good.
And we're the first in Southern California to get it. Southern California Edison doing that. But it's also going to stop us to get solar because now we're going to have our power poles buried, so we don't care.
It's literally 30% cheaper than they thought it was going to cost.
What's that, Ron?
What?
It's literally 30% cheaper than they claimed it was going to cost.
For what?
To underground?
Undergrounding the line, yeah.
So that's what's very exciting. No more public service power, whatever's. And
the other thing is that those wires will last 100 years underground, and the ones above ground. So you're replacing maybe 2 or 3 above ground wires for every one you underground.
And overground lines in the high temperatures sag, and they have to derate them. Underground lines have no problem.
So it's exciting news for Saddle Peak.
Paul Newman. Paul actually has solar panels on his rooftop. Paul. Oh wait, you're muted. You're muted. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. But thanks to you, Harvey, I got solar through a recommendation, and I got about 18 panels. And when the CUP, the California Utilities Commission, had that hearing on net metering, I called twice, first of all, and just about everybody was against net metering that was on that line. And I waited all 3 hours. It was probably 4 hours that it lasted, and nobody was for net metering, first of all. And secondly, I called Stan Kurtz from LA Solar. I spoke with him, And I said, are you aware that about this net metering and everything? He didn't know about it. You know, and you bring up a really important point. A lot of the people in business, for some reason, seem to be ignoring what's going on or something else.
Yeah, it's outrageous. It's really outrageous. And Paul, how successful have your solar panels been?
My solar bill for the year, and that includes air conditioning, central air conditioning and everything, was $325.
Wow. And what do you pay for the panels? Do you have a monthly?
2019, I bought the panels and put them up.
Oh, you bought them outright?
Yeah.
And what did you pay? Do you remember?
Pardon?
Do you remember what you paid?
Yeah, well, with the tax credits and everything, it was 23,000 minus the tax credits, so it's $13,000.
Wow. So your payback, are you getting payback from the utility?
No, just credit.
Oh, okay.
Credit is payback, right? Yes.
Yeah, technically, but that's if you use more than you generate on your rooftop.
And I'm in a program with Santa Monica where I give the electricity to Santa Monica, so it's sort of away from SCE. That's the other cool thing, you know. I don't have to. It doesn't go to SCE.
That's Southern California Edison, who owned San Onofre. Okay, I can't see again. Steve, I don't know what's happening with my my gallery. I can't see if anybody else has a hand up. Does anybody else have a hand?
Justin has his hand up again.
Justin, go ahead, please. And to talk, if you brought people on, there we go. I don't know how that happened, but I've got my gallery now. Justin, and then Mark and Alice. Go ahead.
Everybody, Justin, please check your updates before coming into the Zoom. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead.
So there's another net metering decision that's going before the California Public Utilities Commission on November 7th. That is involving multi-family housing, farms, schools, etc. And so in the NEM3 decision, one of the provisions that was originally there that they ended up taking out was that all of the electrons from your solar panel first have to go to the utility. They cannot go to your self-consumption. And I know this sounds insane. In fact, it is, because if you own something, you have no statutory nor natural law responsibility to just hand it over to somebody else. That's takings, is what it's called under the law. Even worse than eminent domain, because eminent domain, they actually pay you fair market value to take. In this case, PG&E wasn't, you know, there's no fair market value. PG&E is setting its own value. And so that provision is still in the multifamily farm, school, etc. Virtual net metering proposal, which is coming up on November 2nd. And so I encourage everybody to register your absolute disgust with the CPUC on that end of things, because it really is unconstitutional. And then the other thing about, you know, PG&E and their tactics is, I do wonder if a lot of both fire liabilities, also the San Bruno pipeline liability, and various other, you know, as Ron Leonard said, too incompetent to fail bailouts are, you know, piling on with PG&E. And one of those that has been put forth is also increasing people's monthly minimum charges, so that just being connected is considered a privilege that you can pay up to $1,500 a year for. And
insane.
Yeah, they're piling on ways to bail out, and I can't help but wonder if a lot of that has to do with the $22 million that PG&E gave to Gavin Newsom for his re-election over the years.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Thank you for that. Mark Imlay. Mark?
I have two areas to cover. First of all, on wind power, we've had battles on offshore wind and won most of those battles over time. But on onshore and up the land and in the mountains and so forth, every single case, all it takes to win the battle was to have a specialist go out to the actual site and say, no, don't put it right there, put it over there, and you know, make it this tall, you know, that kind of stuff. That's all it took. So you really need a person who understands nature and so forth to actually go to the site, a specialist. And then we've always been able to solve the problem there, everybody happy. Now in solar, we've done very well with one exception, that George Washington University mistakenly wanted a part of their college thing to have a solar power. They would have had to clear 200 acres of old growth forest, and we actually stopped that. But basically, again, usually it's just a matter of the devil's in the details.
You can't hear.
Sorry about that. Well, that's interesting information, Mark. Where are you? Where are you? Mark? Did you get muted?
Mark's muted.
Mark's muted. Let's unmute. And do you work? There you go. Mark,
Yeah.
where are you and do you work with an organization?
Well, I work I live, and I'm talking about the large DC metro area, including West Virginia, Maryland, DC, and into Pennsylvania and so forth. And I'm with a whole bunch of environmental organizations, including the Sierra Club.
So you've been able to successfully put in wind power where there's been opposition. Have you been down to Cape Cod? Have you looked at the town of Woods Hole and Falmouth?
What's the latest on that one?
Terrible. They two people in Woods Hole. They had big functioning windmills, and they basically shut them down there in the dump.
Oh,
I mean, it's really been bad. It's amazing how much damage the anti-green people can do.
yeah.
But on the other hand, I got to say, again, my screen share has gone weird. My gallery, but does anyone else have a hand that I can't see at this point in time? Okay, it seems to me, based on this conversation, Linda SEELEY, that our really most powerful route might be on the economic issues. I mean, it's such an obvious slam dunk here that and the other thing that we really need, and we need to discuss very quickly, we're at 3:37 here, is the media coverage. We've had no media. We have had some people, some of the media questioning Diablo's extension, but not to the extent that we need. So can you comment, first of all, on the Mother's campaign on economic issues and then on questions of getting media?
The Mothers have never been in the Mothers Charter. We are the group that monitors safety issues at Diablo Canyon. So we've never paid attention to the economic issues there. There are other groups that do. The group that Robert works with, Women's Energy Matters, the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility, they do, that is exactly what they do. And TURN, which is the consumer
consumer group, yeah.
They work with the those economic issues. We're not educated enough about that and it's, I can't add economics to my plate.
Okay, well, I'll do that. I'll write a piece with Robert and
Great.
Ron, and we'll cover the California issue. You have a Mark Jacobson at Stanford who does great work, and Amory is on the case, but it's a slam dunk in California. What we really need is the solar industry to get off their behind and jump in on this. Tatanka, do you or Paul, do you know anybody who can really mobilize the solar industry to fight for this, for God's sakes?
I can call around. I have worked twice, once in the 70s and once in the early 200s in solar sales, all in Santa Clara County and South Bay of San Francisco. And the political consciousness of the people in the companies I was with was there, but they were small. They were like 5 6 full-time employees. And they weren't involved politically at that time. So I don't know. I don't know.
All right, we'll think about it.
I don't know what the situation is. I do know with the large scale, I do know IBEW would love to just, get involved and have this transition. In fact, we were working on that with Romero Institute, working on to present to the nuclear workers a total transition plan for secure careers in solar, right? Not just a stopgap, because they saw that nuclear was dead. I mean, it was only a matter of time that they were going to lose those jobs. And then right about that time is when Newsom got involved and cut his deal and kind of upset the whole cart.
Okay.
So
Well,
Tatanka, I'll work with you to get the National Solar Energy Industries Association, Abigail Hopper, involved, because this has just become last week a national issue again, and California is in their sights. So let's do it. Let's do this.
Great.
Let's pick it
Great.
up.
all right, you guys
Get
have each
together in the
other's
next couple
connections. That'd be
days.
great.
Huh?
Now, one other thing that's going on with energy, and we'll segue quickly here to Maine, is the Pine Tree Alliance. They have a referendum. Wendy, do you want to talk about that, please?
Thank you. I was raised my hand for something else because I think Maya might have hopped off. She's one of the founders through her green amendments. I can speak a little bit to what's going on in Florida because I'm just not as
All
informed.
right. So for those of you, we'll do this again next week. There is a referendum on the ballot in Maine to take over the utilities, and that would be a great thing. We don't know how tons of money. I've seen articles. Tons of money is being poured in against them. Myla, did you want to comment on that?
I do, because it's interesting. The first Tuesday in November, Mainers will be voting on there'll be several ballot issues. And one of them is I believe it's ballot number 3 that they want people to vote yes on, which would allow Mainers to have control over their electricity system. But the industry has poured a lot of money into tricking voters. They put ballot measure number 1 on the ballot, and that would that basically says if there's an expenditure over a certain amount of money, then in order to that Mainers would have to decide, and they would have to go back to the ballot. And it's a way of it's a kind of a sneaky way of defeating the Pine Tree Power Initiative. So people really need to be educated exactly about what's on the ballot and not fall for something that looks good on the surface but was really designed to defeat Pine Tree Power. And I should probably look it up and make sure that I'm right about which one is ballot measure 3 and which is ballot measure number 1. Okay, it's yes on 3. So it's yes on 3, but it's very important to vote no on question number 1, because question number 1 would actually work as a way of defeating 3, even if 3 passes. So
these guys are so sneaky.
Mm-hmm.
And can I ask a question?
Please.
Maya, do you know the money? Who are the people behind trying to confuse us here?
Oh, I do. And it's really interesting because it's their private equity. There's money from, I believe, the United Arab Emirates that's profiting off of Maine's high electricity costs. There's, I believe, anyway, there's a lot of foreign money involved. It isn't local Mainers who are profiting off of the exorbitant electricity prices. And I think that Mainers pay through the teeth, as it were. They pay really high rates. And the people who are making all of that money the foreign interests that are making all that money, the private equity companies that are making all that money, are willing to invest big bucks to keep their gravy train going.
Right.
And it's not only a gravy train, it's a horrible train. It's a train you don't want to get on because there's a rating agency that rates all the utilities across the United States. The last on the list is the two utilities in Maine, both owned by foreign corporations, one Iberdrola that we were just talking about, and they have the worst service and the highest prices. And the thing that you don't want, giving a critical infrastructure to a foreign entity that could affect your life.
Yeah.
Right. Kathy Wolf is on. Go ahead.
About a decade and a half ago, the place I lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains, our neighbor in Felton, California, succumbed to a European interest in our water. And, warned not to, it passed barely, and water prices went through the roof. And it took them 10 years at a huge cost to buy back our own local water. I mean, that's happening all over. That was a German company.
Yep. Go ahead. Wendy, go ahead. Continue if you want.
Thank you, sir. I didn't realize I was unmuted if you heard me typing. I was going to say that an Israeli company just took over Fort Lauderdale's water this year under a really unconscionable contract. The way that it was presented was extremely deceitful to the people, in a really specific way. And we had something similar with what happened with FP&L. I will say with Maine, which whatever the pine tree one is, if Maya's working on it, then it's based on a green amendment, which would amend the Constitution so that it would put the people's right above the legislature in a way that protects based on kind of rights of nature, rights of access. I guess utility, electricity being a fundamental right would be the way that I would explain that or expect it to be explained. And in Florida, a couple years ago, I worked on a different petition campaign, and we were trying to get a regulatory framework provided to the people so we would have a way to distribute excess energy like you're talking about with net metering. But beyond that, though, so we could be able to have co-ops. I would be able to supply my neighbor. Landlords could let their tenants be able to share with each other. And FPL came in with a competing ballot initiative, exactly it sounds like is going on in Maine, and it was worded so weirdly and wrongly that people thought that they would be voting for one way when it was actually for another. And we had a grassroots campaign, and people like me that were going around with the good petition, and the one that I was working on paid about half as much as the deceitful petition. So you had these petitioners coming in from all across the country getting paid a ton of money, and they were really aggressive, following me around if I was places, filming me. It got really, really dirty. I had to call security a couple of times on places that I didn't have permission to be. And I had to call security because the other petitioners got so aggressive. But we ended up defeating the deceitful measure through grassroots communication. But our measure was also defeated because the courts were basically bought off, and it just got to be a bunch of mumbo jumbo with it. Really quickly, I did put up my hand. There's just for the solar discussion, there's also a group, it's like veterans for it. It just slipped my mind, but I'll put it in the chat. It's like Advanced Energy by Veterans, and it's veterans that started this company where they train other veterans to learn how to do solar. And because they don't want their children have to grow up and fight wars for energy. So they're former vets that are trying to do renewables. And I will just say about what's going on right now in Gainesville. There's thank you, Stephen. That's exactly it. The Advanced Energy Project. So in Gainesville, DeSantis, they just passed a bill that preempted Gainesville's ability to have to oversee its own public utility, which historically it's always done. So this is a Republican bill that just passed. And so DeSantis just appointed a new board to regulate it. And it's all Republican appointees, mostly people that don't even live in Gainesville. And people are really worried that they're going to basically privatize it and sell it to FP&L, just like what they tried to do in Jacksonville, where they have a public utility and a bunch of people were arrested for fraud. And like, I'll report on it more some other time, but it got really crazy where there were fake candidates put up fake newspapers, all in order to privatize the utility in Jacksonville. And luckily that was defeated, and they're trying to do it again in Gainesville, which is where UF is. It's a very progressive area, and it's just very disturbing. FPL has way too much power, no pun intended. They own the nuclear, they own the solar, they own the net metering. To me, net metering is a consolation. Like, it's not free market. Like, you shouldn't have to be forced to sell only to this power company. It's your power, you made it. So it's it's a deep issue, and I'll stop here, but that's what's going on. And definitely always read your petitions that you're signing, moral of the story, and read the bill and inform yourselves. Thanks, guys.
Unbelievable. It's just sickening. Justin, go ahead. We're almost at the end here, so if anybody wants to jump in. This has been a very productive discussion, and we really need to focus, I think, on the if the people in New York really knew how bad the $7.6 billion deal with the Cuomo stuck them with, to keep those nuclear plants alive, they would have never gone after his sex life. I mean, who cares? He's just ripped them off, as Ron Leonard knows, for $7.5 billion for nothing. Justin, and then Richard Lewis. Justin, please, and then Richard Lewis.
Yeah, specifically on Maine, the deal that is being proposed is to have the state do eminent domain purchase of the assets of the power companies and then run them as a public power agency, kind of like municipal utilities do. The interesting thing here is a lot of the disinformation is the idea that the state is going to have to carry the load, therefore charge extra taxes, which is a lie, obviously, because first off, the assets pay for themselves. Power, the private companies wouldn't be in it if there wasn't any profit, right? And so that's obviously a lie. But the other thing about public financing is that it is often better terms than private financing. And most power companies have not been paying off their assets. They have been refunding their assets by continuing to sell bonds on the open market, which they have to pay a really high interest rate for. So they are actually in a worse shape than a public utility would be. And yet, again, the lie is that somehow the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for all of this, which is absolutely not true. In fact, it is those foreign companies' propaganda, which gets into ballot question 2. Specifically, they are trying to create a ban on those foreign companies and foreign governments and other foreign influence in elections, because the truth is that these companies do spend money trying to craft public policy in their favor. And so ballot question 2 would block that by saying any group that is 5% group or 1% individual ownership by foreign entities would be banned from participating in elections. And by the way, that covers 98% of all S&P companies. So S&P 500 companies. So that means pretty much all large corporations would be out of the discussion ring, and it would go back to citizens, which is where it should be, because you're living there. You should be the one making the decision.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Richard Lewis. Still have 46 people with us. Carl Grossman had put in the chat. Carl, will you just tell us what you put in the chat real quick? Then we'll go to Richard. Go ahead, Carl. I think. I can't unmute you. I think we've had this problem before.
I'm on mute.
There you go. Up.
Yeah. Go for it. Oh, no.
Carl.
Try to unmute.
Oh, there
Okay.
you go.
Hey, you're good.
Yeah, this was a bailout for nuclear plants, totally uneconomic, in upstate New York for $7.6 billion, organized by Andrew Cuomo, the governor at the time, under the guise that they produce carbon-free energy. And I just put in the chat an article I wrote about this. So you got to watch out now that they're, the chief piece of baloney of the nuclear promoters is that we need nuclear to deal with climate change. A big excuse for these bailouts locally, nationally, is that they're carbon free.
Yeah, it's garbage.
And
Nonsense.
the fun fact is, on one of those nuclear power plants in upstate New York that we're substituting our tax dollars for, the first thing they decided to do was set up a mini hydrogen hub to produce hydrogen from nuclear power. I'm not kidding you. But this is going to be used internally in the plant. And the other little fun fact is the one nuclear power plant that was really turned on, the Shoreham nuclear power plant on Long Island, well, we still owe $450 million after decades of paying off the $5 billion debt that thing incurred on Long Island. We still owe $450 million on that stinking mess.
It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Richard Lewis.
I just like to introduce myself as an old fart down here in Santa Cruz. Good to see my friends from the past. I want to be a bridge. I'm not in the expertise that you have. I'd like to build a bridge to where the 1,200 community colleges are national, and what we can do in California. I know, Tatanka, that you visited CCC. By the way, they have a Halloween party at King City that you could meet regionally, the leadership. But today, I'd like to speak of strategy, straightforward, maybe 2 minutes.
2 minutes is good. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Never going to be another county with a mayor like Fred Keeley in Santa Cruz. That's where Romero exists, in a Holy Cross church. I've been there. But what I'm proposing is you start with one block in one neighborhood, and you start where there's a senior center. For sure, we're going to try Watsonville for many, many reasons. But think when it comes to Santa Cruz, we got a UC. If we're going to look at 224, the key is to get that 18-year-old coming up age-wise to a community college to vote. So I'm looking forward, staying with this focus on climate, and it's way beyond me, but I want to build a bridge from progressives nationally to what could be done with what is student governments as hubs, the community colleges. In Los Angeles, that is a district that has 14 community colleges. All you got to do is check out CCC, and what you can do to bring that issue of the reactor and what we could do to involve students. How'd I do?
Beautiful. Thank you for that. That's a great
Youth
idea.
Youth power. But the truth is, it's not going to come. It's going to come from mentors or the senior power. I have a domain name for a homies union. Think of what it was AARP had. I so far, excuse me, but I'm 86 years young. Think of what 28 million in AARP, now 40 million. Think of dues for a union for $5 a cup of coffee, one cup at a time. And I just thank you for these 2 hours. I'll be back.
Thank you so much. Good to have you. Robert FREEHLING, I think we're going to make you the last. Anybody else wants to jump in, raise your hand now. Go ahead. Oh, Myla does. Okay, Robert, go ahead, and then Myla. Robert FREEHLING. We still have 44 people with us. Robert FREEHLING, are you lost here? Myla, go ahead. We'll go back to Robert. Go ahead, Myla.
Okay, just really quickly, I need to have a word with Tatanka and with you, Harvey, after this call. Just a real brief discussion.
Okay. Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Myla. Robert FREEHLING. I guess he's not there. There we go.
No.
It might be a phantom hand that he didn't lower.
Oh, well, then he's got
Possibly.
a handsome name there as well. Okay. And Linda Seeley, are you still with us?
No, she had to leave.
Okay. All right. So listen, it's 4:00. Who knew we'd actually end on time? We'll
Well-
resume this next week. Did I hear Robert trying to yell out here? No.
No,
Okay,
it's right.
everybody, this has been a great call, as always. Next week we'll deal with the issues we didn't cover. Kathy Wolf, you'll give us. Oh, by the way, the law says that the elections occur on the second Tuesday.
Oh,
of every-
okay. Okay.
It's
Sorry
the
about
second
that.
Tuesday of every November. It's actually in the Constitution.
Oh, wow.
It's when elections happen.
Well, Kathy Wolf is with us.
What's that?
Kathy Wolf is with us.
Hey,
Did you want
Kathy,
to
how
talk
are
about
you?
who
Good to see your
spotlighted
name.
Kathy?
And okay, we'll let Wendy take us out. Wendy, do you want to say goodbye to everybody? And we'll see you all next week. Rob, thank you, Steve Caruso, Mike Hirsch, Wendy, our team, and Myra. This has been an amazing session, and we will definitely work on it. Go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say I love and appreciate you guys all so much, and especially you, Sluggo, for bringing us all together for so long. And I just want everyone to stay in gratitude for the good things and picture and visualize strongly the possibilities that this world can come to, and contact your representatives and tell them peace now. Thank you so much, guys.
Happy Halloween, and let's put
see
the
you next-
ghost of dirty power back in the grave.
Well, I got my Halloween teeth, so you know.
All right, yeah.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Milo,
care.
I'll call you in Tatanka.
Oh, good.
Later.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
No
No
nukes.
nukes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.